entrance of the shop, and they were coming around and imbibing this strong, I keep mentioning this strong beer, going back the worst for wear.
Still goes on.
Well, it may be not as strong as it was, possibly. And I used to lie in bed at night and hear these merry people coming home, singing. They're always singing, whether they came from the Rose and Crown, which is no more, or Red Lion, which is still flourishing, isn't it? But, my father spent most of the time in the office because there was an awful lot to organise with branch shops, the telephone, and bookkeeping, and ordering, and wages, and income tax, you name it. I think he had some help, but he did most of it himself. And then he would occasionally walk round the establishment and he'd say exactly what you would expect him to say. Madam, are you being attended to? Which is what they always say, isn't it? And I know he had a slogan beside his desk, very brief, framed, and it said, "Do it now." Because I wondered as a child, I said, why do you have to do it now? Why can't you do it later on or tomorrow? And he said, because you have the trouble of remembering to do it. He said, do it when you think about it. Otherwise, you've got to struggle and struggle to remember and do it later on. I said, well, yes, I think you've got a point. And I tried to do that in my life, but I found it sometimes for sanity's sake, you have to let things slip a bit. Otherwise, you just never make it when you've got children and a job and the rest of it. Now, what else can I tell you? I don't know. Trying to think. Oh, something my father said, which was lovely. He said, we employed a lot of the local people. A lot of young men came as school leavers. At 14, they came in knee breeches and they stayed a lifetime. And you know, I think people here might remember Sammy Hallier from 6 Mile Bottom.
Yes.
And Mr. Potter from Wesley. And they certainly stayed a lifetime. Because I would go up to the drapery to see Sammy Hallier and pour out all my troubles to him.
Wearing white coats.
Oh, yeah. And he was lovely to talk to. And I could go and pour out my sorrows if I had any. Yes, I thought that was nice, and they were so happy.
Yeah, lovely.
And I just think to me it was an Aladdin's cave. I just couldn't wait to get in there. My father would come out and say, you again, you here again. But it was a lovely, happy place, I think. Yes. That's Brinkley shop, as it was.
What about orders, deliveries and the payment kiosk?
I was just going to say.
Orders. Well, the vans went down all the the lonely farm drives and lanes. They went everywhere. And they went all the villages around. I'm in 6 Mile Bottom, Western Coburg, you name it. So the shop staff worked terribly hard because as well as getting up serving the customers who came in, they had to get all these orders out to be delivered. So I think they worked very hard. And they were open till about 8 o'clock at night, 6 nights a week. So I think they earned their salt all right. They're very good. But they certainly went everywhere. Didn't stop not to go down a dark lane or a lonely part of the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're going to have an opportunity to ask Dinah some questions later on. I think at this moment we'd like to thank her very much for just bringing to life what obviously was something quite extraordinary in this village, and as I said earlier, what a great shame that it's not here now. Dinah.
Can I just say that I have put on the table at the back an article that was printed in 1932 in Town and Country Life. And there's a picture of Montague and all about the shop, and that's at the back. And I've got 2 aerial photographs that my brother, who was in the Air Force, flew over and took. And so it's got the old buildings as they were. looking down because it's changed so much.
Yes.
So that's just
That's marvellous. Anyway, Dinah, thank you so much. Problem here?
We have a private I don't know about these others. They could obtain water, which is a terribly important factor in life, as you know. Everything depends on water. Now, do you know where our water came from in those days? One of the sources of the stir is in the pond in the hall. It's never run dry, that pond. You know that, Diana, don't you? There's a spring there, goodness knows where it comes from, but it is the start of the stir, there's the stir, and it runs away. But that was terribly important, and probably on this particular bit of line, there were probably springs all the way along here. The springs are due to water that has collected in the woody parts and has probably flowed underground and comes to the surface in the sort of chalky bits along here. So these parishes all had their springs in that sort of line. So they had woodlands to hunt in, they had wood for their fires, they had water to sustain their health, and they had a lovely bit of ground for growing their vegetables, because by the time, I'm talking now about Neolithic man, that's 5,000 years ago, although of course it still applied right up to 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. But there they had all that, and they had access, if necessary, to that great sort of Silk Road of England, the Icknield Way, which flowed all the way from the east to the west. So that's the reason why all these villages, all these parishes, had a bit of everything, and that's why they're that thin, peculiar shape. That's quite important, and I think you will probably now take a greater interest in some of these other villages and see why they're like that. You can see quite a lot of the woodland is still there. Now I'll take you into Brinkley in a little bit more detail, because I want to show you where I have established there was a settlement, I know this, 5,000 years ago. Now, this map has contour lines. Now, if you don't know what they are, I'll just explain very briefly. You'll see I'll pick on this one. That's 105. Now I'll pick on this 110. That's meters above sea level. And all parts of the country which are 110 meters above sea level are joined together by this line, and that's called a contour line. And there it goes. And so this is the one I will concentrate on. That's the next one. That's 115 meters above sea level. And that is a very tiny, pear-shaped piece. And if you stand there and look in any direction, you're looking downhill. Now, that is where I found an absolutely superb Neolithic half-polished axe head. And it's on the table there for you to have a look at. I've put a modern handle on it, and I've just bound it in modern leather. And that's probably how it was. But I found it in that field. It was joy of joys. I knew there had been a settlement there because I had come across frequent flakes, which I discovered and knew what they were. I'm going to tell you in a moment why I knew, because I have always, since quite early childhood, been interested in flint. And I'll show you a few of the other examples in my boyhood. Then there's a lovely Mesolithic flint axe head, or general tool, because flint in those days was a terribly important material. They could, if they were clever enough, they could make a tool like that which had a tremendously sharp edge, and they could use it either for hunting or for scraping or for, I don't think they shaved, but they've probably done that before. This one being Mesolithic is probably 30,000 years old. Now that wasn't found in Brinkley because there's no gravel pit in Brinkley. I used to live in Bedford, and I used to cycle out as a boy to the gravel pits. There were 4 or 5 gravel pits, quite within cycling distance, and I used to go there. And in those days, I'm talking now about 1930, in those days they used to dig the gravel out by hand. There were 3 men in a team. There's a little diagram on the table over there, which I drew out just to show you how these 3 work together. The top man used to dig the topsoil and make a heap of it, and the cart used to come down and bring it out from time to time, fill itself up, and take it off and get quite a lot of money for that. Then there was the middle bit, which wasn't all that valuable. It was a sort of, I don't know what you call it, it was a mix of sand and rather so-so gravel, very, very small gravel. And they used to, I think a lot of that used to go away for just hardcore. And then eventually they'd get down to the gravel level, which was about, quite varied, 10, 12 feet below top level. And there were 2 men. One man would spend his, I think they probably changed from time to time, but he would be digging the gravel with a shovel and throw it into a sieve held by the 3rd man, and the 3rd man would sift this down into a barrow, a wheelbarrow, and the smaller stuff obviously landed in the wheelbarrow, and the stones and things like that used to be in the sieve. Now, until I went there, I say rather modestly, they were thrown onto a heap, and they went away as stones. After I'd been there for a little while, the men who were on the sieve, and I think they used to fight for that sieve, they used to get a bit of pocket money from me every now and again when I went to visit them, because I told them what to look for, and they used to find these lovely Mesolithic, because they did dug down to the water level, and that's where these lovely, I thought they were lovely, they were not, but fantastic pieces of artifact. I've incidentally, over the years, it's only about 4 or 5 years I did this, but I did collect, so I gather, 125 of these lovely Mesolithic worked artifacts. And they are now in the British Museum, and they're labelled the Turner Collection.
Oh,
I'll show you one. I put a tuppenny piece there, because that is exactly an inch. So it gives you an idea of how big these things are. I'm telling you all this just to give you my authority for saying that I found flints in Brinkley. There's another one. That was another one. Now that was white, and it was white. They've all got heavy, what we call patina or patina, which comes over thousands of years of being in the gravel. They grow this lovely sort of covering, and you can tell from that they're very old. But if you look carefully, you can see if I press the wrong thing. I wanted to show you. Yes, you can see. You can see where the flakes came off. After a time, you get used to looking for these. Those are called rings of percussion, and on the bit that came off, there's a bump of percussion, which is a hollow there. So once you get the hang of that, you can see straight away whether it's an artifact or whether it's just been broken in that way. Now the other one is that one. That's got its lovely workings there. And of course, at the time they were done, these edges were like razors, terribly sharp, flint. Flint is the local material. Now we come to pottery, because I found quite a lot of pottery in Brinkley, particularly in my garden. When I used to do my digging, I used to keep my eyes open. This pot actually didn't come from Brinkley, but I put it there because it is interesting. It's a very early pot, and it shows you how they did the handles, which are much stronger, like that. Put a leather thong across from that handle to the other one. You need a handle that isn't going to break, because this is very poor pottery. It's not at all strong. In fact, when they used to want to heat the water, they couldn't put that pot on the fire because it would just baked and crumbled and petered out. So what they did was to put on the fire what we now call pot boilers. There's one on the table over there. It's a circular flint. And you can see as it's been in the fire many, many times, the little bits have come off, and it's all absolutely riddled with cracks. So that was a pot boiler. They used to heat the stones up, just get over them with crude sort of tongs made of amateurs probably, and poke them into the water and then sizzle away and heat the water up beautifully, and vegetable soup and mulligatawny and goodness knows what. So that's how they eat it. Now, the pottery that I have found are just these bits, these sort of pieces. And if you look carefully on the table over there, you'll recognize some of them. There's a handle a bit like that. And you'll see how thick and crude it is compared with our porcelain, particular porcelain, but even pottery today is really quite thin compared with that. Because it's been fired at a very high temperature, which these people couldn't possibly reach. So that was their pot, and that was what they did, and that's how they made their soup. So look on the table, that's the other handle. Let's come off the other side. I didn't get the bits in between, unfortunately. There's that's a lovely spear here, and you can see the lovely workings along there. It would have been as sharp as a razor. Right, now enough I think for flints. That came from the same gravel pit, and does anyone know what that is? Tooth, yes. Can you tell me what animal it was?
Mammoth.
Mammoth, that's right. A mammoth in Bedford. And that was in the Mesolithic period. That's in the British Museum too now. The lovely one. I found about 6 of those, or the gravel diggers found them once I told them what to look for. And they're all in the museum. So that's another one. I'm really telling you what my childhood days off consisted of, and I used to get quite excited about it. Now we're going to modern Brinkley now, modern by comparison. Dinah has given us a lovely vision of it from the 1920s onwards. Now we're going in between, really. and this is when we saw some steam. And some of you will recognise some of the characters, and this is rather fun, I think. Would anyone like to guess who that is?
Mr. Sparks.
No, not Mr. Sparks.
Jack
Jack Goebel, that's right. Jack Goebel. He loved this machine. He built it up. I remember he was ailing even at that time. He had very high blood pressure. But I remember he had his boiler out, and I said, "What are you going to do with that, Jack?" "Oh, I shall get that fixed up, all right." And he did. He used to, I think, get tripods and goodness knows what, and he could handle his heavy